Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're joining from today. Thank you for joining our weekly live podcast interview, where we interview guests to discuss things related to digital transformation, everything that's tech agnostic and related to digital strategy, people, process, and technology. That's what we cover here in this weekly live discussion. We're streaming to YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, X, and Instagram. So thanks for being here today, wherever you're joining from. My name is Eric Kimberling. I'm the CEO of Third Stage Consulting. We're an independent consulting firm that helps clients throughout the world reach their third stage of digital transformation success. And this weekly live discussion is part of our weekly Transformation Ground Control podcast. So if you're interested in seeing past episodes of that show or just seeing that podcast in general, you can go to transformationgroundcontrol.com to learn more and to see past episodes, to subscribe to it, to follow it, all that good stuff. So be sure to check us out there, transformationgroundcontrol.com. We release new episodes of that show every Wednesday at that website, and as well as to all the audio podcast platforms. So be sure to check it out there. This interview will become part of that podcast in an episode that's released in 2 to 3 weeks from now. So by being here today and asking your questions, you get to be part of the live production of this podcast. So I want to hear any questions you might have here for us here today on the topic at hand, which is business intelligence in ERP implementations. We're going to talk about BI and analytics, and really how you can get information and data out of your system to get more value out of it and to have better visibility into your business as part of your overall digital transformation and enterprise technology initiative. So thank you for being here today. I'll introduce our guest here in just 1 second, but real quickly, we are going to take live questions as we get into discussion. So if you have any questions, please drop those in the chat, whatever platform you're listening or watching today. We're watching the streams or the chats across all platforms, so be sure to drop those in the chat as you come across any questions you might want to ask or any comments you have. I've got my questions, but we'd love to hear from you as well. And speaking of the chat, if you don't mind dropping in the chat, what city and country are you joining from today? We tend to attract a global community of digital transformation enthusiasts, so we'd love to hear what city and country you're in here today. I myself am in Denver, Colorado here today, which is where our company is based, and love to hear from you where you're joining from. So what city and country you're joining from, and that same chat feature, by the way, is the same one you can ask questions as we go through the conversation. So today's topic, business intelligence in ERP implementations. To help me unpack this and understand this topic better today is Dominique Frechette, who is with Guru Solutions, the general manager of Guru Solutions. So Dominique, thank you for being here today.
Thank you, Eric.
It's great to have you. So before I jump in and just start asking you all the stuff about BI and analytics and ERP technologies, all the stuff we're going to get into here today, tell us a little bit about, first of all, about you, but you personally and your sort of career path and how you got to where you are, but also tell us a little bit about Guru Solutions, if you don't mind.
Yeah, so I joined Gurus 10 years ago now. Prior to that, I was more in the engineering, industrial engineering, automation in the industry. And then I decided to join Gurus and get my first foray in IT, ERP implementation, and all that stuff. So I joined initially as a VP of professional services and moved to the rank now, heading the Gurus business in general. Gurus is a NetSuite ERP pure play reseller and consulting firm. So we implement and resell NetSuite as an ERP. And typically we serve an industry range, like in various industries like manufacturing, distribution, software services. But typically our customer range are the customers starting, say, at $10 million top lines up to say close to $1 billion top line. So that's typically the customer type we serve. And it's a interesting audience, especially for the topic of today, which BI, because typically that's the type of customer that are buying their first ERP. They typically move away from QuickBook and then they move to their first full-blown ERP. And then the question of BI comes along. And this question then led us to so many reflection around BI versus ERP, and do you need one versus the other, and both at the same time, that at the end we ended up developing our own BI solution for NetSuite-centric customer. So that's where we develop our expertise in BI for the ERP style audience.
Gotcha. Very good. So I guess as we get into this, though, tell us a little bit about how ERP software, ERP technologies, and business intelligence work together to help businesses make informed decisions, and how do they relate? Maybe we could start there, sort of a foundational overview of ERP and business intelligence. How do they fit together? How do they support each other?
Yeah, so it's an interesting question because very often customer buying their first ERP think that they won't need an ERP or BI because, well, ERP has built-in reporting facilities. So if I'm buying an ERP, then I have basically my BI or at least my reporting tools built in. But the reality is we found a couple of use cases for which you need a dedicated BI even if you have an ERP. The first family of use case where you need both is correlation, data correlation. For example, even if you buy a very complete ERP, it's very common practice that you will still have one or two best of breed system. You're an online retailer, you might be operating with your ERP and a Shopify e-commerce platform, for example. You are a distributor, you might be running your ERP and a dedicated WMS or things like that. So then all of a sudden you end up with key data in two independent systems. So you can run report with the native functionality of, say, of your ERP. You can run native report in, say, your Zendesk solution for your customer support desk. But then what if you need to build a report or investigate data event for which you have data in both systems? So correlation among multiple systems is typically the first use case for which we see a need for a BI on top of your ERP. And it's very common practice, and I would say even call that best practice to still have one or two best of breed system on top of your ERP, typically for your core function. So even if you have the bulk of your data in the ERP, you still have very key important information in your best of breed that is supporting your core function. Along the line of correlation, then you might have also to do correlation between your ERP data and external data source. And by external, I mean external to your business. For example, you want to do an analysis on your sales trend for seasonal items that you resell with weather forecast. Well, weather forecast is not in your ERP, but clearly it's impacting how you're selling sporting goods. So how do you correlate those two types of data? While one is clearly outside your ERP, it's even outside your business system, but still publicly available.
Right.
For example, even our BI tool is leveraging Google BigQuery warehouse under the hood, and even part of the tutorial of a Google BigQuery tutorial, you learn how to pull data about weather forecast or demographic of states and things like that, how to pull that in your BI so that you can now do correlation with your ERP sales, for example. And then what we see is sometimes you even need to do correlation, but among ERP modules. So even within your own ERP platform, you end up having different modules. And typically the native functionality of those ERPs make it a bit more limited to join multiple, like, people that know SQL would call that multiple join. So sometimes native ERP functionalities have limited ways to join multiple modules together. It will support it, but only a little bit. So correlation is typically the very first family of use case for which you might need a BI on top of your ERP.
Right. Yeah, those are great examples.
Then there is also the notion of volume. So, I mean, an ERP is based on an operational database, a database that has been optimized to operate modified data. For example, I received that good, so you mark those goods as received in your ERP. Well, that means that this database might not been optimized to pull huge volume of data just for the sake of reporting. And I remember in the old days, if you had an exec in his office running a very, very extensive report, slowing down the operation on the shop floor. So that's probably something you don't want. I mean, it's not happening that much with modern system, but still volume is sometimes a very good reason to have a BI on top of your ERP.
Yeah. Those are all really good reasons. And I have a follow-up question I want to ask you on that here in just a moment, but I do want to turn to the audience real quick and Give a quick shout out to some of the people that commented on where they're joining from today. Want to say hello to Alcinda, who's joining from Johannesburg, South Africa. Kevin's joining from Denmark on LinkedIn. So thank you for being here. Niloy is joining from Dubai in the United Arab Emirates. And then we also have Mike on YouTube from Houston, Texas, and Darian joining from Denver, Colorado. So thank you for being here today. And then we have a comment here on YouTube from Rocket League Noob. What the heck is this? Well, this is a conversation related to digital transformation, business intelligence, analytics, reporting, all that stuff as it relates to ERP technology. So thank you all for being here today. And then also we have John from Montreal joining on LinkedIn as well. So thanks everyone for commenting where you're joining from today. Again, any questions or comments you have on the topic here of business intelligence, love to hear from you as we go through the conversation. But Dominique, you give a great overview of how or where you might need or want to consider business intelligence tools to augment your existing enterprise technologies. Why wouldn't I, if I'm an enterprise technology buyer, and let's just say I buy NetSuite or any other ERP system out there, why wouldn't I just use the BI that they've already got? Like why do I need a separate BI tool, or why don't the ERP vendors just have that BI capability built in automatically?
Yeah, well, typically what we've seen, and it's something we can cover a bit more details later, but if you need, and again, I come back with this idea of correlating data from various data sources. If you want to use a native ERP function, reporting functionalities to report on data sitting in another system, well, then it means that you need to bring the data from that other system back in the ERP. And there's very good operational reason to do so. But if you want to do so purely for reporting, you might end up polluting your ERP with tons of data that is not needed to operate the business. And you bring it just for purely reporting. So that's why at some point we say, well, these systems like an ERP, a CRM, or a Zendesk style customer support system, they are operational systems. They are there to help you operate the business, to log a transaction, to see if you have the item in inventory, to help a sales guy carry through a sales cycle. But if you want to do reporting and trend analysis, then you probably need to have data from all those systems and purely in a read-only fashion. So also then you want to be a bit more creative on how the way you structure your data and the way you analyze it than what this strict requirement from an operational perspective is bringing. I mean, those systems are quite rigid for a good reason. I mean, like an ERP, it's at the base, it's an accounting system. I mean, the data has to be structured such that it's compliant with accounting standard. But it might not support what you want to investigate in terms of trends. I want to see which of my sales rep is the most efficient during a given season and selling which item. All of a sudden, you need more creativity on the way you build your report than what those native reporting facilities would provide.
Right. Yeah. Makes total sense. Now, when companies are trying to integrate business intelligence with their ERP systems, what are some of the common challenges or the most common challenges that they face?
So let's be clear. Typically, the ERP is your most complex data source in the business. I mean, a CRM is typically a complex data source, but never as complex as the one you have in an ERP. First and foremost, ERP data model is always complex because of the accounting compliance that goes under the hood. For example, you won't be able to remove an item from your ERP if you already logged a transaction that is posting with it. And typically, ERP have been also on the market for a long time, so there's tons of legacy reason that creates some kind of intricacy in the data model. So the data model of your ERP is the most complex data model that you need to bring in a warehouse under the hood of a BI. So the very first common challenge we see is people thinking about the ERP as just another data source. But the reality is that's the most complex one, and the one that is also the most complex to decipher. So one of the big challenges is how to pull and make sense of that data source when you bring it in BI. And because in the BI, what you want is to ease the job of the people building report to investigate what they want to investigate about the business. And you don't want to make them specialists about the ERP data model itself and all its intricacies. So I would say that's typically the first challenge is people pick the wrong architecture.
Mm.
So if we take a step back, what's the architecture of a BI? I mean, I'm going to bring it very simple. The first part is you need a database warehouse. So basically a database optimized for reporting. So warehouse, cube, call it the way you want, but a database purely for reporting. Then typically you need to connect a visualization tool to it. So the Tableau, the Power BI, things like that. So you want to connect that visualization layer to your warehouse. And typically you would pick the visualization layer based on what your user already knows. So if you're already familiar with Power BI or if you're already familiar with Looker Studio, then go for it and connect it to your warehouse. But then you need a connector that connects your data source and bring the data in your warehouse, and a data model in the warehouse that makes the job easy for people building a report.
Mm.
And this is where this is the biggest challenge. We've seen people going for simple database replication tools, and then they try to replicate the database model. And at the end, they say, okay, but how can I make sense of all those cryptic names and columns? And how do I do all those multiple join between that specific transaction and the items and the payment of that transaction? All those links are typically completely broken when you just go with a simple database replication tool. So this is the most common challenge we face. And
Mm.
we see it specifically for ERP, a bit less for other business systems.
Yeah. Yeah. And just getting, the good business intelligence and getting value out of business intelligence tools are only as good as the data you have in the system. So, I mean, do you see a lot of organizations that are struggling with just having clean data or accurate data that gives them accurate business intelligence?
What we see is from the data that is coming from the ERP, again, because the ERP and all these call that requirements for compliance with accounting, typically the data in their ERP is quite good in terms of integrity, links between the data, cleanness. For example, in an ERP, you just cannot remove a customer name if there's a transaction attached to that customer. So typically the data on the ERP alone, when you bring it in the ERP, if you do a good job of deciphering it, you're good. Challenge comes as soon as you bring more than one data source in the system. For example, you bring data from your ERP and you bring data from your CRM, and all of a sudden the same customer has been spelled twice differently.
Mm. Right.
But the goal of the BI is to correlate data between what you have in your CRM and what you have in your ERP. But then you cannot correlate because the customer name has not been spelled correctly.
Right.
So this is type of things where we see a bit more about the data integrity, and then people cannot build a report and cannot rebuild those links. Even sometimes, even just the database replication tool will break the links. And let's face it, the power of the reporting is the links. If you break the links, well, at the end, it's just tables of data.
Yeah. Yeah. And just to give a kind of example of that potential data breakdown that you just described, let's just say, your name is Dominique Frechette. And let's just say, that obviously the real spelling of your first name is IQUE at the end. But if
Yes.
I enter a new Dominique Frechette thinking that it's spelled with an IC at the end, the Americanized version of your name, then then now I've got two records with the same person and the data doesn't necessarily consolidate. So I've got to clean that up now, merge those two records to create, a data set that BI could draw from that's accurate. Because if I don't do that, then BI is still, even though it's a great tool, still going to be inaccurate because the data is wrong. So,
Exactly. And now, I mean, even you mentioned my name typos, but now look at my family name with an accent on the third letter, and all your audience coming from abroad. I mean, they all know is like Do we put or not the accent in the system? And what if
Right.
I
Yeah.
a
What's that
simple,
called? The little what's that symbol called that goes above the E? Is that what you're talking about?
yeah, accent aigu, as we say in French, yeah. So you just remove that one and replace that by a plain E on my letter, and then also then it might be two different records in two different systems. Bring that in the BI, and you cannot make a link anymore. So how come Dominique, as a sales rep, has been so poor performance in the last month, and you try to go and use your report BI tool to understand that, but then the reality, no, it was not that bad. It just was logged under with an accent and the other data system.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's super interesting and a great example. And I also want to say hello to Amin on YouTube, joining from Paris. I'm guessing that there's a fellow French speaker there as well, joining from Paris. And then Diggs from Twitch is joining here today and says, "Hey, what's up?" So thanks for joining from Twitch. I forgot to mention we are also streaming to Twitch here today. So thanks for being here, everyone. And again, any questions you have, please drop them in the chat. I'm also curious to hear from the audience here. What BI tools have you used? I'm just curious to hear if any of you have used BI tools of any sort in the past, whether it's embedded in your existing ERP system or where you've used Power BI or any other sort of third-party BI tool. I'd love to hear from you. Any comments or feedback on what your experience has been. So, Dominique, can you share some examples, or do you have any like customers of yours or companies you've worked with at Gurus that have successfully leveraged BI tools to optimize their ERP
Yeah.
systems? Could you give us maybe some use cases or examples of how you've seen customers you leverage BI?
So typically, I mean, we all think about the BI for the main three use cases. First one is serving daily operational dashboards. Like your CFO comes in the morning, drink his coffee, and look at a couple of reports about bank accounts and sales that happen overnight, things like that. Or performing that investigation. Something strange happened, the performance of a sales rep drop, and you try to investigate. Or as we discussed at length, trying to correlate multiple data sources. But we have seen customers that have used BI also a bit outside these beaten path of BI usage. The first one I love is board package automation. You know, CFO's nightmare typically after they close the month. So it's already a big nightmare. They need to close the month. October, like end of October is coming. After Halloween, all of a sudden they have 5 days to close the month. It's already a very intense week in their month. But then the following week, they also need to pull a tons of reports to prepare a board package. Suppose they are a public company or they have institutional investor on board. Sometimes even just their bank needs the board package. And all of that, all of a sudden, not only you need your financial reports, which you can pull from in the ERP or out of the box, but you might have to format it in a specific way for your board. Your investor might need specific metrics, and then you also need tons of, I would call that non-financial reporting. So if you're a SaaS business, you might have to report on churn, which is beyond what you will find in financial statement. And typically that's what you see also then the finance team scrambling around looking for a couple of reports out of 2 or 3, 4 systems, then pulling that in Excel and trying to format that and then submit that just in time for the board meeting. So we have seen customers using BI purely to automate all their board package. So as soon as the month end is finished, they close their books, they push a BI button and it prints like 25 pages of reports, and that becomes the basis of their board package report. So this is an example of where you can use BI to save time, provide insight in your business through those reports, and even provide those insights for an audience that is external to your business. So board package automation, we love to talk about that story because it's definitely one place where we could see the stress level of our CFO's customer being lowered a little bit by the use of BI.
Right. If you can keep the executives happy, then that's that right there is probably a good business case for BI tools.
Yeah, I mean, I have to be careful with your audience, but a stressed CFO is typically not a good news in a business.
Right. I would agree with that.
Another use case we've seen in the context of an ERP is typically when you move from a legacy ERP, you move to another one. And then all of a sudden it's okay, and what do I do with the data in my legacy ERP? I've been using that tool for the last 10 years. I might bring all the data in the new ERP, but then why would I do so? Like, why would I bring all my former employees just because in the new ERP, just because there's one transaction I want to bring that was done under the name of that employee? And tons of things like that. I mean, as soon as you start to pull data out of a legacy ERP to bring in the new one, you realize that there's multiple. I mean, it's like pulling a tree out of the soil. I mean, there's tons of ramification that you need to bring at the same time. So then you might say, okay, no, I'm just going to import in my new ERP the data that I need to operate now, like an open transaction. This is a PO I placed to a vendor. I've not yet received the goods. I've not paid that vendor yet. So this is an operational transaction. Let's put that in the new ERP. But then, especially if you're cloud-based or SaaS-based, I mean, that data, the day you stop paying your legacy ERP, you lose access to the data. So you're stuck in that dilemma of it's bad to bring all the data, but it would be bad to leave it behind also.
Right.
We've seen customers use the BI such that they implement the BI for their new ERP with the correct data model in the BI to support their new ERP. But at the same time, they do a one-time load of the legacy data in the new BI, and that becomes the repository in the BI. And then people that build report can do seamless report where you transition from one data source to another, because you have your new data from the new ERP that is always fresh, synced overnight every day, and your legacy data that doesn't move anymore because, I mean, you're not using that legacy software, but the data is still residing in the warehouse, and it allows you to do all the reporting that you need to do, especially when you're looking at long-term trend in your reports.
Right. Yeah. Makes sense. And those are great examples of where you can be getting value, or where you're seeing customers get value out of their
Outside the usual things where we expect to get value, which is correlation
right.
and daily dashboard serving
The standard dashboard, standard reports, that sort of thing. Yeah, there's a lot more value than just that, although, that alone can provide a lot of value too. Also want to turn to the audience here. A couple comments here. Olu Bengo joining from X says, hello, Eric. I'm a huge fan, learning a lot from you. Thank you for joining here today, Olu Bengo. Also want to show just some comments here that the audience commented on regarding what systems or what BI tools they have experience with. Alcinda on LinkedIn says Power BI is widely used in my organization. Niloy on LinkedIn says he's used IBM Cognos as well as Microsoft BI. Kevin on LinkedIn has used native Power BI and Tableau. So some good examples of some good BI tools. How would you, how is your, just out of curiosity, how is your tool set that you guys work with at Gurus and that you offer to customers? How is that different than some of the others that are out there in the marketplace?
So I would say the main difference is really the connector that brings NetSuite data in the warehouse. So the warehouse is a Google BigQuery. So we love that warehouse because it scales easily, cloud-based, ready for AI. Also, we can discuss that a bit later if you want. And then we let the customer choose the visualization layer they like. I mean, customer that already trained on Power BI, then they will connect their Power BI to that warehouse. People that love Tableau, well, you already have Tableau, you already have 20 people trained on Tableau. Let's connect Tableau on it. What we provide out of the box is a Looker Studio visualization layer, one from Google, very easy to use. But we've seen typically the two big names we've seen is Tableau and Power BI in terms of user preference for visualization layer. The real differentiator is really in the data model that you bring in the warehouse, how you decipher the data from the ERP such that people building report can make sense of that report. I'm going to use an example. It's NetSuite related, but every ERP will have that. For example, in the NetSuite data model, suppose you are a service firm, you use a project management module. Well, a project in NetSuite is a sub-customer also. But I mean, poor guy trying to build a report on a project profitability. And then all of a sudden, project is also a sub-customer. Depending on the situation, you have a customer and a sub-customer, but sometimes you have a customer and a project. So how do you decipher that? And also then you need to look at other flags, and then the job of building the report can becomes easily very messy. So our connectors and the data model that we built has been do a very good job of deciphering that, building views. We call that views in the database, but it looks like other table, but it's table that makes a lot easier to decipher data. Another example that is true for all ERP, you typically have in ERP a transaction table. All the transaction. They might be related to your sales and revenue. They might be related to your purchase and expense, but it's all lumped in the same table.
Right.
Now, so then you try to build a report to look at, for example, your spending on specific type of vendors, and you need to filter out from that huge humongous table. You need to decipher out to remove all the revenue type transactions so that you can focus on purchasing. Well, our connector, rather than just replicating the database transaction, the transaction table, will create multiple tables or multiple views of the same table so that you just can query one view from that.
Right.
Another thing is if you have a Power BI or Tableau or other BI expert here, trying to rebuild a balance sheet in a BI from a transaction table is a huge nightmare.
Right.
Anyone that tried that will understand what type of endeavor it is, especially if you have to deal with multiple currencies, with all the consolidation that comes with it. Like building a balance sheet is a nightmare.
Right.
So we build views. So when the connector sync data overnight, it builds views such that when you need to do a balance sheet report or balance sheet like report, then the job is maybe 2/3 or 3/4 done already. It's directly in the warehouse. So you don't need to re-implement all that logic about consolidated balance sheet in your Power BI tool, and in fact, reinventing a balance sheet report that ERP vendor has spent years to develop.
Yeah. That makes sense. Now, a lot of what we've talked about so far has been focused on sort of the backward looking aspect of BI. Like you mentioned, for example, the board packs, the board presentations every quarter, every year, whatever, however often it is that a team has to provide data to the board as far as metrics around the business. So a lot of it has been sort of backward looking. So I'm curious, this is an interesting question from Darian on LinkedIn. Darian says, how can companies ensure they're getting real-time insights from their ERP systems through BI tools? So in other words, rather than necessarily waiting until the end of a period and then consolidating results and using BI to forward that, board package onto the board, how can we use BI, or can we use BI to get more real-time sort of day-to-day real-time insights?
So I'm going to, and I'm an engineer by training, so I'm going to define real time. Okay, first. And typically it's a very complex word in IT. What means real time? And real time is basically fast enough for for the intended purpose. So if the fast enough that you have in mind is, for example, knowing if you have an item in inventory to accept or not an order, this has to be done on the fly. It's within a second, within a minute that you need to have the answer. And this is the best place to leverage native reporting functionality of your system, of your WMS, or your ERP. You should not rely on a BI to know something that might have changed in the last minute.
Right.
Okay, this is the best place for the native reporting functionality. Otherwise, you might end up accepting an order for an item you don't have in inventory because another sales rep sold it 5 minutes before. If we're looking at real time in terms of daily, weekly report, this is where BI makes a lot of sense, because typically BI, you will sync like once a day, you will sync data from your various data source and bring that in your BI. And when you do so, And because remember, a warehouse has been optimized to pull report and not to insert data. So trying to sync your warehouse too often is typically not a good practice. But suppose that you are thinking about real time about daily or weekly basis. This is where BI shine. I've seen so many business, as you said, driving their business only looking backward, like at month end or quarter end. You look at the quarter result and then you need to take decision for the next quarter. Well, you know what? It's probably too late already because by the time you have that board package, that event that you need to react on is already 3 4 months old. So what we've seen is people looking at BI to look at non-financial performance and take decision on it. Take an example, a service company. Time entries is key. With a BI, you can look at your time entries report every day.
Right.
You're a VP of professional services in your, say, law firm, for example. You walk in, you look at time entries that has been input in the system the night before. You build nice report from that, investigate, and then you realize, oh, we need more people. And now
Right.
you can take an hiring decision way sooner
Hmm.
because you get real-time data. But by real time, we mean on a daily or on a weekly basis, and typically non I call that non-accounting grade data, like time entries is not a posting data that a CFO would report on, but it's still very useful for operation. Inventory movement also for distributors. Like, okay, all of a sudden we've seen a spike in the last 3 days of that inventory movement for that type of items. Maybe it's time to rush an order for that one and not wait for month end analysis to realize, well, we don't have it in stock anymore. I mean, so
Right.
these type of things, this is where you see real time, like on a daily, weekly, looking at non-financial data, I would call that.
Yeah, more of the operational stuff that so in other words, the CFO that you were talking about earlier may not be as interested in that stuff, but the COO is going
Yeah.
to be very interested in that, for example. Yeah, very good. So what do you think about as ERP systems evolve? How do you see BI and ERP continuing to work side by side, or do you see them working side by side? Do you see them becoming more integrated, or what do you see as sort of the future of BI within the world of ERP?
Um, it's interesting. So in the world of ERP, I would not be surprised to see in future a bit more what we did at Gurus, which is BI that are ERP centric first and foremost. And again, mostly by accepting and acknowledging that the ERP is your most complex data source. So that I mean, it's obviously a bet we took at Google who's investing in a NetSuite centric BI tool, but it's definitely a trend we expect to see more in the future just because of that complexity. But then leads to that, brings to that question is okay, interesting. And I have a BI, I have an ERP. I log in my ERP every day because I need to do my business operation. But I would need to log into a BI tool to look at more my weekly reports and understanding. For example, if I need to reorder, rush something because I have more inventory movement on one thing. So we see a bit the concept of re-embedding your BI report in the ERP UI, such that the user can log in the ERP and through some clever mechanism within his ERP UI has a report that has in fact been built by the BI on the side. So that we see that as a potential trend of how ERP and BI can collaborate so that the user experience is a bit more seamless. You don't
Mhm.
have to log into the independent system. What we can see also is that you might end up seeing in future a bit less, we call, when we say we integrate, say, a best of breed system at your ERP. And let's take, for example, you're connecting your Salesforce CRM to your NetSuite ERP. We've always seen two use cases for such integration. The first use case will stay. And the first use case is, for example, integrating so that when a sales rep in Salesforce closed an opportunity, it creates a sales order in the ERP to minimize data entry by the finance team. All of a sudden, I'm getting a phone call from the rep. He closed one an opportunity and need to create a sales order in NetSuite. So that integration to minimize data entry will stick.
Right.
But what we've seen is people integrating or pushing that integration to bring more of their Salesforce data in NetSuite, for example. And if we follow that path of a closed one to a sales order integration, but bring tons of other data that are not needed from the sales order perspective, but just because they wanted to build their report out of the ERP. So they bring tons of data. We see this trend being done a bit less, such that people will say, no, 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 let's connect those two systems for their operational intent. But from a pure reporting data analysis perspective, let's do the BI, pull the data out of the CRM and out of the ERP and then build a report there. So we could see that a bit more in the future rather than just pulling tons and tons of data in your ERP just for reporting it.
Right. Right. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense, and a lot of good examples there of how that evolution will likely continue. I want to say hello to Sandra, who's joining on LinkedIn from Chicago. Thanks for being here today, Sandra. What about the cloud? You look at cloud systems, and obviously you guys have a product that's built on a SaaS cloud-based platform of NetSuite. So this might be somewhat of a moot point for your organization or for Gurus, because your product is in the cloud and it's always been in the cloud, being part of the NetSuite ecosystem. But just in general, how do cloud solutions like a NetSuite or any of the other ERP systems that are moving to the cloud, how does cloud enable better business intelligence, or how do those two things go hand in hand?
Yeah, well, I would say at first end, cloud and BI did not work well together. It's a bit counterintuitive.
Is that because of the architecture, or sort of the difficulty architecting? Okay.
The way that most people use to implement the BI in their business was to access directly to the database of the operational system, like the ERP, or accessing directly the database of their CRM. I remember in my first days in business, I wanted to build a report. I would go in Excel, fire my ODBC style driver, directly go to my, I think at that time it was Microsoft Solomon I was using, and I would pull directly from the database data and build my report. So Excel was basically my first BI, like for many of us.
Right.
But then all of a sudden, cloud-based system appears. And cloud-based system are not going to expose their database as easily for plenty of good reasons. Security, upgrade. If those developers want to give themselves the right to change a column in their data model to implement a new features, and all of a sudden they don't want to break everything, so you don't have access to your database. And I would say that that's the first thing we've seen when cloud appears that kind of broke the BI model. A typical way to you integrate Microsoft Power BI or Tableau is use an ODBC SQL-like layer and access to your database.
Right.
Then all of a sudden, native cloud system won't allow you to do that easily. And that's the case for NetSuite. Then those ERP vendors, they saw that it created tons of frustration with some of their user because, well, their user used to connect to the database layer of their legacy ERP. How come I cannot do that with my new ERP? So they start to offer ODBC-like connector. So basically, it's almost like an interface that acts like you're accessing the database, but it's always slower, never has performance as you would like, does not support all the data that you have in your ERP. So all of a sudden, when you need to implement the BI in the context of a cloud-based system, you need to go to the API. And this is where all those typical database replication tools fall short.
Right.
They need to rely on the ODBC layer, SQL-like layer, but that one has not been built for the cloud. So also then performance are not there. And one of the use case of a BI is to have more volume. But now also then you cannot go to more volume because of that limitation. You're not using the native API. You're using a second thought style ODBC layer. So this definitely changed the way people implement BI on the cloud. Is you need to look at the how you connect those systems differently.
Right. Yeah. Now, what about, so we talk about cloud. What about artificial intelligence, machine learning? Let's talk about that for a minute. Now, how's the world of BI, AI, machine learning, how does it all fit together?
Yeah, it's an interesting. If we look at what happened in AI in the last, I would say, 12, 18 months, the big breakthrough, the one everyone is talking about, is ChatGPT-like tool, LLM.
Right.
What those tools are doing is they are great at generating stuff, generating text. So we already see a use right now, even with Goose BI, but other BI, where you can leverage those tools. Like in the case of Goose BI, is Gemini, which is built in Google BigQuery, so that you can, from a natural language prompt, ask it to basically to build a query for you and run the query. And then, for example, give me my top 5 sales rep in the last quarter. And then it would write a SQL query for you, run it, and you would see it in the report, like in natural language. Then you will look at that and say, oh, yeah, okay, but slice it by type of item sold. I mean, which of my rep are better by, say, the type of items. So you fine tune your SQL query without knowing that much about SQL yourself.
Right.
So this, we see it today. It's already happening today. But today, I would say those tools are very good to help SQL savvy data scientists be faster and more efficient. But this is today. At the speed things are going, very quickly we see the concept of AI generation, like as a self-serve meaning. I mean, it's always been the holy grail of all those systems, that you don't need to rely on your IT team just to build your report.
Right.
Hey, something strange happened yesterday in my inventory, and all of a sudden the first guy you call in your office is your IT guy, not your warehouse guy, because you
Right.
need somebody to build a report for you. I mean, the goal is that you build your report yourself very quickly to understand what happened overnight with that inventory item. And then you call the warehouse guy and say, okay, what can we do about it?
Right.
But today we still need to go with IT people, and IT people can be more efficient because of what is available today. I would say within few months, not few years, few months, we can get definitely a lot closer in this concept of self-serve. The CFO, the CEO, the director of a given department using natural language to pull and build a report all of a sudden. So that would be good. And with this one, we see it's around the corner. But what is funny is that when people were looking at AI, I mean, AI has been investigated for the last, 20 years, more than that. That's not what people had in mind when they were thinking about ERP data and AI. They were thinking about two use cases, which is not an AI trained on natural language to pull data for you, but more about an AI model trained on your data, not trained on text that can pull data for you, but really trained on your data to achieve two things. The first one is, and the easiest one was anomaly detection. So that when you walk in the morning, you look at your computer and you have a red alert because there was a strange inventory movement during overnight. The AI has been trained on your data, and all of a sudden that movement is a bit unusual. What happened?
So it recognizes the anomaly, or it's trained to
Yeah.
recognize the outliers of the anomalies,
Or rather than just helping you build a report that can then you flag the anomaly.
right.
The holy grail of AI was always the predictive analytics. It's like building all of a sudden is like trying to plan ahead. with all that past data, like all those past sales, and that water forecast that we have in the forecast for the next week, expect more sales of that,
Right.
like predictive analytics. That's the holy grail. And to be honest, this is not available today.
Hmm.
And even here at Goose, we played with tools like Vertex AI and things like that. And you can see that this is coming, but this is a bit further along than purely having a self-serve SQL bot that is building a report for you. It's because, and typically we think is because the data set that you have, even if you're a huge enterprise, your data set is still more limited than
Hmm.
what ChatGPT had access to do a large language model things where they had access to the whole internet to train their model.
Right.
While uh, if you want to train your model on data, structured data that you own, then you don't own as much. So that's why we still think that there is some fine tuning to achieve this holy grail of predictive analytics
Hmm.
with AI, at least for the mid-market layer that we're looking at, typically the company below $1 billion top line. This might be a couple of years again in front of them, but BI is still your foundation to get there.
Hmm.
I mean, when you think about it, what an AI model needs to be accurate and trying to predict stuff is need access to as much data as possible of various data source and already structured so that you can train an AI model on it. And this is basically the data model that you have today in BI.
Right. So
So,
it's BI is not just about the reports that they produce. It's also about the sort of the foundation and the integration and the infrastructure, the data infrastructure to pull it all together. Is that
and
a
then to
fair
have
thing?
anomaly detection and predictive analytics that we've always been hoping for. I mean, and let's face it, ERP, what
Yeah.
stands P for?
Right.
Planning.
Planning. Right.
What today ERP are doing is mostly record the past.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
The forward
Yeah.
looking is still not has, I would say, it's still not the main feature of an ERP. It's still not the main feature of BI. And even ChatGPT like AI is still to report, called that, in natural language from existing data set. Predictive analytics is the next holy grail, but this one has not seen the same progress as we've seen with large language model in the last 12 months.
Hmm. Curious to hear it from the audience too. Are you seeing any use of AI and LLMs to sort of replicate what BI tools would normally do, or to get better insights from your system? I'm curious to hear if you're seeing that with AI or LLMs, or if you think that AI will AI replace business intelligence tools someday. It sounds like Dominique, you're saying probably not because you need that BI infrastructure. But I'm curious to hear from the audience too.
Yeah, we see that almost like just the same thing. It's just an easier way to understand your data.
Right. Right. So, what about the organization that's just getting started on their journey, and they're trying to figure out, you know, not only what ERP system do I use, but then now there's another decision I might not need to make, which is business intelligence. How do I get business intelligence out of the tools that I'm investing in? So, how do you recommend that an organization get started on their path forward for the digital transformation to include business intelligence? Like, how would you recommend that we bake this into our way of thinking as we think through our ERP project or our digital transformation?
So let's take the use case of a company that is buying their first ERP. So they don't have BI in place. They are moving out of QuickBooks. Say, for example, they reach $50 million top line, times to move out of QuickBooks and buy our first ERP. For those company, we would say that when they are selecting the ERP, they should definitely look beyond what the ERP vendor are going to show regarding the built-in reporting capabilities. Um, let's face it, I mean, typically this question is putting the vendor in a tough spot.
Right.
Okay. And we are one of those vendors. We know that. It is like, because all of a sudden you want to wow the customer that is looking for a new ERP with all those nice reports and BI concept. But you don't want to complexify your sales cycle by introducing a new tool. As you just mentioned, it just makes, another decision, another thing to think about. So all of a sudden, sometimes vendor will oversell, I would say, a little bit their native reporting capabilities, such that the customer can buy the ERP without having to think about their BI at the same time. Which I would say we agree to an extent to that approach. And we can come back where we agree, which I think it's good if you implement your first ERP, the first 3 months after go live, you just stick around, you just stick with your ERP and no extra tool. I mean, it's already a lot to digest by an organization.
Right.
But at the same time, you need to already have in mind which BI you will implement when it's time to get there. And I would say make sure that you look that you have the solution in mind where the ERP and the BI will play well together again, because your ERP will be your most complex data source to bring in the ERP, in the BI. So looking at that, what would be the solution? How can I pull the data out of that specific ERP I'm about to buy? And how can I pull the data in and bring it into a warehouse? And by all means, I mean, we've seen so many of our customers trying with those database replication tool and being so disappointed that just go beyond that. You need to go beyond that. It's like, yeah, but does that data model will make sense once in the BI? Can I build a report out of that? And if you selected like a combo of warehouse or BI, connector and ERP that will work well together, then you can start by just implementing the ERP. At least you took the right decision. You implement the ERP, deal with it for a while, explore the native reporting functionality to it as much as you can. And as soon as then you hit limitation, like correlation that we mentioned, or a couple of things like that, or volume, then you move on to implementing the BI that you pre-selected beforehand.
Right. So sort of like looking at the big picture, understanding what the roadmap's going to be to include business intelligence as part of your planning and evaluation process, but then recognizing that you're probably going to implement BI later after you get the core foundational stuff in place. Then BI sort of fits on top of that. Yeah. Very good. Well, good. Well, this is really good. This is really good stuff, Dominique. Really appreciate you taking the time here today to answer these questions about BI. Such a fascinating topic, especially now with the advent of the cloud and AI and LLMs and all that stuff. It's really interesting to hear more about your perspectives. How do people learn more about you and about Guru Solutions? What are the best ways to learn more about your tools that you guys offer?
Yeah, typically our website and www.gurusolutions.com that we can share. So a good way to learn a little bit more about our solution, our services, and then on our website there's tons of contact forms there. You can also reach me on LinkedIn if you want, and we would be happy to share more data and information with you.
Absolutely. Well, that sounds good. Well, thank you, Dominique. Really appreciate you being here today. And thank you to the audience for the great questions. Again, we'll polish this up. We'll edit it. We'll add additional content to it, to this conversation, and then we'll release it as a formal podcast episode for Transformation Ground Control in 2 to 3 weeks. In the meantime, you can see all the past episodes going back to early 2021. A lot of really good content. We do this every week. It's about 2-hour episodes that come out every week. Go to transformationgroundcontrol.com. You can see all the past episodes as well as listen and watch on whatever platform you want. So thank you again, everyone, for being here today. Check us out, same time, same place. Every Tuesday, we do these live conversations to talk about different topics related to digital transformations. Thank you all for being here. Hope you have a great day, and we'll see you